Part 1. The perfect life that wasn't mine. When I think back to the beginning, I don't remember a single moment when things went wrong. There was no sharp turn, no explosion, no screaming match that split my world in half. It was slower than that. Like a slow leak in a tire. Quiet, unnoticeable. Until you realize you're stranded and the road behind you is gone. My name is Rachel Whitman, and for a long time I thought I had the perfect life. I was raised in a mid-sized town in Pennsylvania. My parents were simple people. Honest, hardworking, conservative in values but liberal in love. My younger sister Claire was the wild spirit in our family, the one with sun-kissed hair, laughter that could fill a room, and a knack for getting away with anything. She was trouble, but the kind you couldn't help but love. I was the opposite. The planner. The fixer. The girl who always did the right thing even when no one was looking. After college, I started a freelance interior design business. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I had a small but steady list of clients. I liked my quiet life. I liked structure. I liked knowing what to expect. And then Marcus came along. He was everything I wasn't: loud, confident, charismatic. He had that magnetic pull that made you feel seen even in a crowded room. I met him at one of Claire's parties. She introduced us, laughing as she spilled wine on his shirt, and we all laughed along like characters in a rom-com. It felt harmless, easy. But something about Marcus stayed with me. He texted me the next day. Then he called. Then he invited me out to dinner. Before I could make sense of it, we were inseparable. He was 10 years older, already successful, already established. He owned a growing real estate development firm and talked about buildings the way poets talk about love. He was full of ideas, always chasing the next opportunity. When he asked me to move in with him 6 months later, I didn't hesitate. I was flattered that someone like him wanted someone like me. I thought he saw through my simplicity and appreciated it. I thought I made him feel grounded. He proposed the following spring. The wedding was perfect. Small, elegant, everything I had imagined. Claire was my maid of honor. I remember looking at her during my vows and thinking how lucky I was to have both of them in my life. I didn't know I was watching the two people who would break me standing side by side. Part 2. The sacrifice that went unnoticed. After we married, Marcus asked me to put my business on pause. Just for a while, he said. He needed help with staging, branding, social media. All things I was good at. He promised it wouldn't be forever. Just until things stabilized. I agreed. Because that's what good wives do, right? So I worked behind the scenes. Unpaid, unseen. I created marketing campaigns, redesigned his office, wrote pitch materials. I scheduled his meetings, managed his calendar, ordered office supplies. When people asked what I did, I said, I help my husband. I didn't realize how quickly my own business had turned into his assistant. He never introduced me as his partner. Never gave me credit for the growth. I told myself I didn't care. I wasn't in it for the spotlight. I loved him. I believed in what we were building. But it wasn't we, it was always him. Claire was around a lot. At first it made sense. She was between jobs, always floating from one plan to the next. Marcus said she was fun, that she reminded him of his own younger sister. I didn't see anything strange. Why would I? But there were moments. Small ones. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. The way he watched her dance at one of our dinner parties. Her sudden interest in the real estate market. I caught him texting her late at night once. He said they were planning a surprise for my birthday. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I did. Part 3. The moment that changed everything. It wasn't a grand discovery. It wasn't even intentional. I wasn't snooping or suspicious. I was driving Marcus's car to the mechanic. He said something was wrong with the engine. While I waited in traffic, I opened the glove compartment looking for the insurance card. That's where I found it. A receipt from a boutique hotel dated 3 weeks earlier. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except it had 2 breakfasts charged to the room. 1 bed. No conference listing. And the room was booked under Claire's name. I didn't react immediately. I just stared at the slip of paper, letting the pieces fall into place. It felt like my stomach had dropped through the floor. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything at all. I drove to the mechanic. Handed him the keys. Smiled when he joked about the traffic. Walked back home in silence. That night, I laid in bed next to Marcus, thinking about how many mornings I had made him coffee. How many times I had folded his shirts, scheduled his meetings, paid our bills. I thought about Claire. How I had once given her half of my college savings when she needed to get out of an abusive relationship. How I defended her when my parents said she was selfish. The betrayal didn't feel like a knife. It felt like a slow disintegration. Like something inside me was turning to dust. But I didn't confront him. I didn't tell anyone. I just stopped. Stopped giving. Stopped explaining. Stopped hoping. And I started planning. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was pretending that I didn't know. For weeks I said nothing. I smiled through dinners, answered texts, laughed at jokes, and even helped Claire pick out a new dress for a friend's wedding. I watched them both act so normal, so easy in their lies, and I stayed silent. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. I began observing Marcus with new eyes. How he moved. What he said. What he hid. I took mental notes of everything. Passwords he typed. Email accounts. Meeting schedules. Conversations on speakerphone he assumed I wasn't listening to. I never wanted revenge. I wanted freedom. But freedom doesn't come cheap when your name isn't on the business, the lease, the bank account. So I started building an exit. The first step was simple. Education. Late at night, I sat on the couch with my laptop, pretending to scroll social media while I devoured business blogs, legal forums, and women's finance threads. I downloaded ebooks, watched free webinars, and made fake Gmail accounts to access trial versions of startup platforms. I learned about LLC formation, asset protection, tax loopholes, prenups, and post-nuptial exposure. I discovered what financial abuse looked like. It was alarming how much of it matched my situation. I didn't have money, but I had access. I didn't have power, but I had knowledge. That was enough to begin. Part 5. Seeds of Separation. I started saying no more often. Not loudly. Not in protest. Quiet refusals wrapped in polite smiles. I stopped managing Marcus's schedule. I stopped proofreading his contracts. I stopped being useful. He didn't notice at first. He just assumed I was tired or burnt out. He said he'd hire someone else. I nodded. Perfect. I found a job. Small, remote, under a pseudonym. A copywriting contract for a home goods startup run by two moms in Colorado. Paid very little, but it paid. That first deposit hit my private PayPal account and I cried in the shower. Not because it was a lot, but because it was mine. I took on more freelance gigs. I used a different name each time just in case. I never worked during the day. Only at night with headphones on and the volume low. Sometimes I'd pause mid-project just to breathe and remind myself. This is not forever. This is how I get out. During the day I still played the part. I helped with house guest. Smiled during Sunday brunch. Nodded when Claire dropped in by accident. But everything was shifting. Inside I was already gone. Part 6. Claire's smile. The worst part was not hating her. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to rip pictures, delete numbers, scream into pillows. But I couldn't. Claire wasn't evil. She was just selfish. Reckless. Addicted to being wanted. And Marcus? He wasn't in love with her. He was just in control. He was the next object. I had simply stopped being shiny. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me. Her smile too tight. Her voice a little too sweet. She never asked if I was okay. Never brought up anything real. And I never gave her the chance. Because one day she would know what it felt like to be erased. Not from spite but from truth. Part 7. Gathering ammunition. While Marcus slept, I printed documents from his laptop. I copied screenshots. I saved tax files, bank statements, land deeds, and private Slack conversations. He wasn't careful. He assumed I wouldn't understand. I understood plenty. I discovered offshore accounts. Hidden loans. Projects signed under shell names. He had structured his finances like a fortress. Except he left the gate open. I didn't plan to destroy him. I planned to unplug myself from him, completely, legally, irrevocably. But the more I found, the more I realized. This wasn't just about saving myself. It was about holding him accountable. Part 8. Building a new identity. I registered a new business. Wiggly. An S-corp with my name on every line. I opened a separate bank account, got a virtual address, and paid for everything in cash. I began building a brand from scratch. Slow, meticulous, invisible. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. But it was mine. Every morning I sat at the dining table drinking coffee across from Marcus and I thought, he has no idea. I was the girl he left behind while chasing my sister. And yet I was building the life he thought only he deserved. Part 9. The day I filed for divorce. Filing wasn't dramatic. I walked into the courthouse alone on a Wednesday morning. It was gray outside and I remember the sky looked like unwashed cotton. I didn't wear black. I wore pale blue. Soft, steady calm. My hands didn't shake when I signed the papers. The woman at the desk handed me a clipboard and asked if I wanted expedited filing. I said yes. My voice didn't crack. I walked out, folded the receipt, put it in my purse and went home like nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't tell Marcus right away. I waited until I had finalized the details with my lawyer. I wanted to be precise. Controlled. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose something without warning. To have no say in it. To watch it slip away just like I had. Part 10. The letter. I didn't tell him in person. I wrote him a letter. 4 pages. Typed. Signed. I left it on his desk beside a folder, containing everything he'd need to understand what was coming. Financial statements, legal grounds, evidence. I knew he'd come home late that night. He always did on Fridays. I stayed with a friend I had quietly reconnected with. She didn't ask questions. She just made tea and gave me a bed. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scroll through old photos. I didn't check his social media. I slept like I hadn't in years. Part 11. The silence that followed. He didn't respond right away. Not with words. Just silence. No calls. No texts. No messages. Not even from Claire. But I knew the storm was coming. Men like Marcus don't just accept consequences. They prepare to erase them. When the legal response came in, it was exactly what I expected. Deflection, denial, and lowball offers. He assumed I didn't understand what I was entitled to. He assumed wrong. My attorney filed our countersuit within 48 hours. I had everything documented. Emails. Financial transfers. Undisclosed assets. Claire's name on travel records. He had called me invisible. Now I was unavoidable. Part 12. Claire disappears. She vanished from the equation completely. No defense. No statement. No apology. She moved out of state, blocked me on every platform and pretended none of it happened. That was her pattern. Flee and forget. And for once I let her. I didn't chase answers. I didn't look for closure. Already had it. Because sometimes the worst thing you can do to someone like her is nothing. Part 13. Court. We faced each other across polished wood and artificial smiles. Marcus looked tired. His suit too tight. His charm had turned into smugness. He spoke confidently like a man used to being believed. But evidence doesn't care about charisma. My legal team presented everything. The hidden accounts, the fraudulent filings, the misuse of marital funds. The judge's expression stayed neutral, but I could tell the tide was turning. When the ruling came, it was more than fair. It was sharp. Marcus was ordered to surrender partial ownership in 3 properties, pay restitution for business use of my unpaid labor, and divide liquid assets according to a revised schedule. He walked out of court without looking at me. And I didn't look back. Part 14. Aftermath. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. Felt like waking up and not flinching. The first morning in my new apartment, I stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee and stared at the light hitting the wall. It was quiet. My phone didn't buzz. No one asked me for anything. I just stood there breathing. Felt like being reborn. I changed my name on the business license. Moved my office into a co-working space downtown. Hired a part-time assistant. Created branding that felt like me. Clean, simple, unapologetic. Clients grew. Revenue climbed. I didn't post it. I didn't brag. I just lived it. Part 15. What he took, what I kept. He took time. He took trust. He took parts of me I'll never get back. But he gave me something too. He gave me fire. Because when you strip away the lies, the power games, the manipulation, you're left with someone who has nothing left to lose. And that's the most dangerous version of a woman. I don't wish him harm. I don't think about Claire. I think about the version of myself who once believed that sacrifice meant love. That silence meant grace. That loyalty meant swallowing pain. She's gone now. In her place stands someone sharper. Slower to trust. But never again powerless. I moved into a small loft in an older part of the city. Exposed brick, squeaky floors, barely any natural light. But it was mine. Every plate, every chair, Every quiet morning felt earned. I didn't decorate it perfectly. I didn't care. I didn't need beautiful things anymore. I needed space to breathe. The first money was tight. I watched every cent. I said no to things that weren't essential. I took meetings I didn't want and said yes to projects that paid less than they were worth. But I kept moving. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes more. I didn't complain. I wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. I opened a business bank account, launched a website, updated my portfolio. Slowly, inquiries began to come in, not from old clients but new ones. Word of mouth. Referrals. People liked my eye, my professionalism, my lack of drama. They didn't know that every invoice I sent felt like a middle finger to my past. And I liked it that way. Part 17. Rebuilding myself in pieces. Rebuilding wasn't just financial. It was emotional, physical. I started therapy, not because I felt broken but because I didn't trust my own compass anymore. I needed to know why I stayed so long. Why I let myself shrink. Why I clung to an image of loyalty that cost me everything. My therapist didn't give me answers. She asked better questions. And slowly I started answering them for myself. I learned to be alone. Not lonely, just alone. I took walks without music. Sat in coffee shops with a notebook. I wrote letters I never sent. I forgave people who never apologized. I forgave myself most of all. Part 18. The pivot. Corporate client changed everything. They were launching a boutique hotel and wanted a full rebrand. Design, marketing, interiors, tone. It was the kind of contract I used to dream about. They asked for references, a presentation, a 2-week test phase. I poured everything into that pitch. I spent sleepless nights drawing up mood boards, testing materials, sourcing ethical suppliers. I rehearsed my presentation until I hated the sound of my own voice. When I got the call that they'd chosen me, I didn't cry. I just exhaled. Final thought. That project paid off my debts. It funded my own studio space. It gave me credibility, case studies, leverage. More clients followed. My calendar filled up. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was rising. Part 19. Rumors of collapse. I hadn't seen Marcus in nearly a year when I first heard the whispers. One of his former employees reached out on LinkedIn. She didn't mention the divorce. Just said she admired how I'd grown my business and would love a quick phone call. During that call, she mentioned that Marcus's company had lost several key investors. Lawsuits were brewing. Partners had walked. I listened without reaction. He had always treated his business like a performance. When the spotlight faded, there was nothing underneath. I didn't celebrate his failure. But I didn't mourn it either. You can't lose what was never real. Part 20. The first public event. I was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneurship panel downtown. One of those networking events that used to make me feel small. I almost said no. But then I remembered how it felt to sit at home, invisible, while other people chased dreams I was told weren't mine. So I said yes. I bought a blazer that fit like armor and heels I could actually walk in. I didn't memorize a speech. I told my story. Carefully, honestly, without naming names. The room was quiet when I finished. Then came the applause. Afterward, a line of women waited to speak with me. Some were older, some younger. Some dressed like executives, others like college students. But they all had the same look in their eyes. That look of, I thought I was the only one. And in that moment, I knew that what I built wasn't just mine. It was a blueprint. Part 21. A final glance back. One afternoon, while walking to my studio, I passed a luxury real estate office. The kind Marcus used to brag about. In the front window, a for-lease sign hung crooked. The name on the door was his. The blinds were closed. I paused for only a second before walking on. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I felt distance. As if I had outgrown even the pain. Part 22. Quiet success. There was a moment, months after everything had settled, when I realized I no longer flinched at the sound of his name. A friend mentioned Marcus in passing, not knowing our history, and I just nodded. No reaction. No tightness in my chest. No racing thoughts. Just a name. Nothing more. That's how healing works. Not with fireworks or final confrontations. But with a slow softening. A quiet rewiring of the nervous system. A day when you realize you've reclaimed the silence he once filled. My business was now steady, even thriving. I had 5 full-time clients, a wait list for consultations, and had just hired my first junior designer. We worked out of a bright studio downtown with tall ceilings and houseplants I always forgot to water. It didn't look like power. It looked like freedom. And freedom, I learned, is quiet. Part 23. The Woman in the Mirror. For a long time I had stopped looking in mirrors. Not out of shame, but because I didn't recognize who was staring back. I had become a version of myself molded by someone else's wants. A reflection shaped by compromise and accommodation. But now when I looked, I saw someone else. Someone older. Wiser. Not harder, but sharper. Less forgiving of disrespect. More generous with herself. I no longer dressed to disappear. I chose color. Voice. I didn't need to be loud, but I stopped apologizing for being seen. That shift wasn't cosmetic. It was spiritual. I had spent years shrinking to fit a frame built by someone else. Now I stood outside it barefoot with nothing to prove. Part 24. The Invitation. It arrived in the mail on expensive cardstock with embossed lettering. A mutual acquaintance was hosting a gala for a local nonprofit. I was one of the invited guests. So was Marcus. For a moment I considered skipping it, but then I thought about the version of me who once stayed home out of fear, out of shame, out of exhaustion, and I knew I had to go, not for him, for her. Part 25. The Encounter. He was thinner than I remembered. His hair a little grayer. He still wore expensive suits, but something was different in his posture, like he was trying too hard to stand tall. He saw me across the room. I saw the flicker of surprise, the instinct to come over. He didn't. And I was glad. Not because I feared him, but because there was nothing left to say. That night I didn't drink. I didn't network. I didn't perform. I stood on the balcony watching the city lights flicker, feeling the night breeze against my skin. And for the first time in years I didn't feel haunted. I felt whole. Part 26. The Message. Months later Claire messaged me. A short email. No subject line. Just a few words. I hope you're happy. I'm sorry for what I did. I wish things had been different. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but because closure doesn't always need a door. Sometimes it's just a wall you stop pressing against. I deleted the message, then emptied the trash folder. That was enough. Part 27. Legacy. I started speaking more. At colleges, workshops, women's networks. I never told the full story. But I told my story. About losing yourself. Rebuilding. The quiet strength of walking away. The radical act of choosing yourself. I met women who had endured worse. I met girls just starting to question what love should feel like. I met survivors, dreamers, late bloomers, and former shadows. And I told them what I wished someone had told me. You're not crazy. You're not weak. And you are allowed to want more. Because I wasn't special. I had just had enough. Part 28. My apartment 1 year later. On the anniversary of the day I filed for divorce, I did something small. I bought myself flowers. Nothing expensive. Just a bunch of sunflowers from the corner store. I placed them in a vase by the window and made tea. I sat on the floor, knees tucked to my chest, watching the sunlight hit the petals. I didn't post about it. I didn't text anyone. I didn't even cry. I just sat there remembering. Not the pain. The decision. The exact moment I had chosen myself. And everything that followed. Part 30. Fully mine. I paid off the last of my divorce-related legal fees. I gave my junior designer a raise. I signed a lease on a small second-floor studio with huge windows and a door that locked with a satisfying click. I bought new equipment. Hired a bookkeeper. Started turning down clients who didn't align with my values. And every month, I moved a percentage of my income into a savings account labeled Legacy. Not for retirement. Not for a car. But for whatever came next. Because for the first time in my life, I believed in a future that was bigger than survival. Part 31. An unexpected run-in. It happened in the least cinematic way. At a pharmacy. I was picking up cold medicine. He was buying razors. We locked eyes in the aisle, and for a moment I thought he might speak. But he didn't. Just a nod. A quiet acknowledgement. He looked older. Not just in years, but in weight. His edges were duller, his skin sallow. There was no fire in his expression. Just acceptance. And I felt nothing. Not anger. Not victory. Just neutrality. He had been a chapter. But not the whole book. I paid for my medicine. Walked out. Never looked back. Part 32. Love? I didn't chase it. I didn't scroll dating apps, didn't flirt at mixers, didn't fall into arms looking to be held. But love, real love, found me anyway. It wasn't lightning. It was warmth. Familiar. Steady. A fellow creative I'd worked with years ago. We reconnected on a project. Slowly, gently, we became something else. He never asked me to shrink. He didn't rescue me. He just saw me, clearly, completely, and let me be. We never rushed. We never labeled it. We just existed in the same space. Peacefully. Equally. And for me, that was more powerful than any romance I'd ever dreamed of. Part 33. The dinner party. It was a warm September night. I hosted a dinner at my apartment. Nothing fancy. Just a few close friends, candles, jazz in the background, a lemon tart cooling on the counter. At some point in the evening, I stepped into the kitchen to refill glasses. And I paused. I saw it all. The laughter, the light, the quiet joy. And it hit me. This was it. Not revenge. Not justice. Life. Honest. Fully mine. And I smiled. Part 34. The final word. I used to think I needed closure. A dramatic speech. A confrontation. A moment where he or she would finally say, "You were right. I was wrong." But closure, I learned, isn't something you're given. Something you decide. I decided it that day in court. I decided it when I opened my first invoice. I decided it when I looked in the mirror and finally saw myself. He cheated. She lied. I broke. And then I rose. Part 35. What I left behind. There are photos I never deleted. Not because I want to remember, but because I no longer need to forget. Old vacations. Birthday candles. The wedding. Claire laughing. Marcus smiling beside me, his arm around my shoulder like a claim. Sometimes I scroll through them with a strange sense of distance. As if I'm watching someone else's life. Someone who looked like me. Someone who loved too hard, stayed too long, gave too much. I don't delete them. I don't hide them. I simply don't belong to them anymore. Part 36. What I kept. I kept the lessons. That silence is a weapon, but so is self-respect. That love without truth is performance. That not all wounds need witnesses to heal. I kept my ambition. My discipline. My voice. I kept the small routines that brought me back. Journaling in the morning, walking without headphones, drinking tea in real ceramic mugs instead of paper cups. I kept the version of me that fought her way out. And I never let her go again. Part 37. My own rules. I stopped asking for permission. To rest. To say no. To raise my rates. To stop responding to people who once used my silence against me. I started making my own rules. If it doesn't feel like peace, it's a no. If I have to shrink to fit, it's not for me. If I lose myself trying to keep it, then it was never mine. And I live by that now. Quietly. Steadily. Without apology. Part 38. Legacy. One afternoon, a young designer emailed me. She'd read about my story in an online article. Said she was scared to quit her job. Scared to be broke. Scared to try. I wrote back. Try anyway. Fear doesn't mean don't move. It just means move with both hands open. I never heard back. But I hoped she moved. I hoped she realized that the worst thing isn't failing. It's staying somewhere that makes you forget who you are. Part 39. My sister again. A year later, Claire reappeared, not in person but in a news segment. A charity event in another state. Her hair lighter. Her smile unchanged. I watched in silence. I didn't feel much. Just a faint ache of someone I used to know. Not anger. Not longing. Just space where something once was. I wished her peace. From far away. From the life I no longer shared with her. Part 40. Today. Today I woke up at 6:42 a.m. No alarm. I made oatmeal. Fed the plants. Skimmed emails. Lit a candle. It's a Thursday. No one is waiting for me to fail. No one owns my name. No one tracks my hours, controls my account, defines my worth. I am quiet. I am steady. I am free. Part 41. The last thing I'll say. If you're reading this and you've been there, on the bathroom floor, in the courtroom, in the hollow ache of your own chest, I want you to know something. You are not ruined. You are not late. You are not weak for staying or broken for leaving. You are becoming. And sometimes the only way out is through the fire. Let it burn what it must. Then walk out untouched and start again. Not from scratch. From experience.